In our previous two podcasts, we've explored how gerunds and infinitives are used when one verb follows another verb in English, like avoid doing, for example, and also when this sometimes leads to a change in meaning, like try to do or try doing. Now, in today's podcast, you'll learn some more advanced uses of gerunds and infinitives so that you can really take your English to the next level. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 60 years of teaching between us, that's 60, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. Hello, mate. How has 2025 started for you?
Quite well. Nothing unpleasant. A lot of work, though. A lot of work. It often is, though, isn't it, for this time of year? Some of my students, I think, are even unluckier than me. I have quite a few university students, and in the Spanish system, this time of year, they have a lot of exams at university before and after Christmas in the new year. So I really feel for them. It's a very busy time in the academic calendar for Spanish people.
It is.
What about you?
It is. No, I've been very, very busy as well. I've got 3 conversation courses running in parallel at the moment, private students as well, some other projects. So very, very busy, but that's good. I'm having a good time with the groups. And if anyone's interested in joining the next groups, there will be conversation courses in February and March as well. Send me an email if you're interested. Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com. Now, before we start talking about some grammar, we have a book recommendation from friend of the show, Carmen, who, by the way, has also recommended our topic for next week's podcast. And if you want to know what that topic is, you'll have to wait to the end of this one. Reza, what's the recommendation from Carmen?
Well, her book recommendation is, it's better if I quote her. Let me read her actual words. She has written, I'd like to share with you that I've recently read a book that advanced English learners might find engaging. I like that word, engaging.
Yeah, it's nice.
That means interesting. You'll be interested. You'll like it. The title is Becoming Mrs. Lewis by Patty Callahan. It's the true story of the relationship between C.S. Lewis, that's the author of The Chronicles of Narnia, and Joy Davidman. I love the way the writer explains feelings and emotions and describes cities, clothes, and circumstances so vividly.
So there you go. If you are an advanced learner and you'd like to increase and widen your vocabulary, especially connected to descriptive language, that sounds very useful. Thank you, Carmen.
And if you happen to be a fan already of C.S. Lewis, or if you read the book and you think, oh, he's an interesting character, you could visit his house in Belfast where he grew up. It's quite interesting.
Was he born there?
He was, yeah. Grew up. People think of him as almost quintessentially English, but in fact, he did grow up in Belfast. I think he didn't have much of a Belfast accent because in those days, even people who did come from the regions, as they say, outside the southeast of London, they tended to adapt that Oxford English type of accent. So you would probably never guess that he grew up in Belfast, but he did.
Interesting. I did not know that. Okay, let's get to some grammar. Now, if you haven't yet listened to previous episodes 553 and 554, we definitely suggest you go and listen to those 2 episodes before this one. Because even if you've studied gerunds and infinitives before, it's always a good idea to reinforce your knowledge, review, revise, and make sure you're 100% in control of the basics of the grammar. So let's have a look at how gerunds and infinitives can be used in more advanced English.
So in this episode, we'd like to concentrate on what we call perfect gerunds and perfect infinitives. We don't call them perfect because we really like them and we think they couldn't be better.
Like a perfect podcast, for example.
That's different. Yeah. We hope the podcast is perfect in that sense. But here the word perfect is used in the grammatical sense, like think of the present perfect or the past perfect. When you think of past perfect, it's definitely about something happening in the past rather than the present. Well, it's the same with perfect gerunds and infinitives. They're used to express actions completed before a certain point in time or to indicate reflection on a past action.
Before we get into specifically different types of these perfect gerunds and infinitives, just a couple of quick examples. Having finished the project, she went home. So there you have the perfect gerund, having finished, signifying or showing that the action has been completed. In other words, she went home after finishing the project, after having finished the project.
Here's another example, which could well be true. Having eaten far too many biscuits, Reza and Craig put the lid on the biscuit tin and went back to podcasting.
That could be true, couldn't it? Yeah.
It tends to be the truth. Every time we record a podcast, we do eat a lot of biscuits.
Yeah.
So having eaten is a perfect gerund. First, we ate too many biscuits. That happened first. And then we put the lid, the top on the tin and continued.
Another example, she seems to have forgotten about the meeting. That's a perfect infinitive. It's a reflection. You're reflecting, you're thinking back on a past action. She seems to have forgotten about the meeting. You can see these examples written in the show notes to this episode. It's inglespodcast.com/555. Can you think of one more, Reza?
Here's one more perfect infinitive. I appear to have left my wallet at home. That's what you say if you're in a restaurant and you don't want to pay, I guess. I appear, so you're saying now at this moment, I appear to have left my wallet at home. Oh, the action of leaving the wallet at home happened earlier.
I can think of a couple of people who might say that.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. So let's go to perfect gerunds. And they're formed by having, so using the gerund having plus the past participle. And this perfect gerund shows that the action happened before the main verb in the sentence.
We can often use perfect gerunds to express attitudes of regret, gratitude, or acknowledgement about a past action. For example, with the verb regret, it's very common. He regretted having spoken so harshly. Harshly means in a very hard, severe way. He regretted later having spoken so harshly earlier. The reason we use the perfect gerund there, having spoken, is to indicate that the speaking so harshly bit happened before the regretting bit of the sentence. He regretted having spoken so harshly.
It's also correct to say he regretted speaking so harshly, isn't it? So it's another way to say a very similar thing. Of course, regret is almost always in the past. You regret something that happened before in the past. So he regretted speaking so harshly. He regretted having spoken so harshly.
Yes, that's a good point. There are many, many occasions when we use the perfect gerund, but we could just use the normal gerund. It wouldn't really make a difference. However, there are times when you do need the perfect gerund, but very often they're interchangeable.
Here's another example. They were proud of having won the competition. They won the competition. They were very happy, very proud. Proud is followed by the preposition of, and then you have the perfect gerund and the participle. So they were proud of having won the competition.
Here's another one. The defendant still denies having taken part in the robbery. So clearly the word still indicates that although the action is happening now, the denial, we're talking about a robbery which happened in the past. So we're using the perfect gerund because deny is always followed by a gerund. The defendant still denies having taken part in the robbery.
I've thought of another example with deny that's more current and newsworthy. Trump supporters still deny having done anything wrong on January the 6th, 2020.
Time will tell.
Time will tell, but they still deny having done anything wrong. Reza, what happens when we have a preposition that requires a gerund after it?
Yes, there are some expressions which end in a preposition and they can be followed by a verb. The rule is, if you have a verb after a preposition, it's always a gerund. Always. There are no exceptions as far as I know. So, for example, she was accused of, that can be followed by a verb. Of is a preposition, so the verb must be gerund. She was accused of having cheated during the test. Remember, the perfect gerund is having plus past participle. As we said earlier, here you could say she was accused of cheating during the test, just the normal gerund, not a perfect gerund, and it would work as well. The meaning's still clear.
Yeah, and we spoke about that, didn't we, back in episode 553, when we spoke about infinitives and gerunds in general, that rule of always having a gerund and ing verb after a preposition. What we're doing here is introducing the possibility of having that gerund in the perfect infinitive. So accused of having cheated instead of cheating. Another example, she's embarrassed about, that preposition about goes with embarrassed. She's embarrassed about having trusted her very unfaithful ex-husband.
Now, here is a good example, this one that Craig just said, of one where I think it does have to be the perfect gerund. It would be confusing if you used the normal gerund. If I said to you, Craig didn't say this, but imagine, she is embarrassed about trusting her very unfaithful ex-husband. Now that's confusing. Does she still trust him? You see where the confusion can arise?
So the having trusted makes that clear difference in time than it happened before in the past.
She now doesn't trust him, but she did. If I said to you about trusting her ex-husband, so she still trusts him then, perhaps. You see? So there are occasions when you do need a perfect gerund. So when Craig said she is embarrassed about having trusted her very unfaithful ex-husband, and he's an ex, clearly she doesn't trust him now. She did, but not now. But if I just said trusting, maybe she still trusts him. Who knows? It's confusing. So to avoid confusion, use the perfect gerund.
Another example of the same use, he was praised for having completed the project early. If you praise someone, you say, well done, good job, that's fantastic, and you are praised for doing something. So in this example, he was praised for having completed the project early.
Another use of the perfect gerund, or indeed the normal gerund, is indicating a result for an earlier action. For example, having missed the bus, she decided to walk home. So this having missed the bus is the perfect gerund.
So missing the bus was first and walking home was second.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Another example, having failed the exam, he studied harder for the next one. Or perhaps having failed the exam, he sent Craig an email and took some lessons with him to pass the next time.
A better solution. I have one more sentence which is a bit tricky. I don't want to overcomplicate your lives, but what about this one? Having been defeated by the enemy, the army surrendered. To surrender is to stop fighting. Now you'll notice that one's a little bit different than the others. We said before having missed, having failed, but this one is having been defeated. There are three words here. I've added the word been, having been, B-E-E-N, then defeated. That's because this is in fact a passive. So gerunds and infinitives can be passive. That's not as common as an active gerund, but they do exist. It's very easy. Simply add the word been. So instead of saying having defeated, that would be active. It's having been defeated by the enemy, the army surrendered. It's a passive perfect gerund.
So up until now, we've been looking at perfect gerunds. Let's move on to look at some perfect infinitives. Now, as we said before, the perfect gerunds are formed with having plus the past participle. For example, having spoken, having won, having taken part, for example. Now we've got a different structure. We've got have plus the past participle, or maybe to have plus the past participle. When do we use this? Well, we use this when we want to refer to any action completed before another action or another time frame. And we use it to reflect on the past, think about the past, or maybe imagine some unreal situations. So let's look at expressing past possibility or speculation.
For example, with forget, the verb forget, she seems can be followed by infinitive. She seems to have forgotten the meeting. It appears she forgot, she's not here. So she seems to have forgotten. Not to forget, the normal infinitive wouldn't work there. She doesn't forget the meeting every day. It's not something habitual. It's not something permanent. It just means that right now, she should be here and she isn't, so she has forgotten the meeting. We need to put the infinitive in the past, and the way of doing that is using the perfect infinitive. To have plus the past participle. She seems to have forgotten the meeting.
A quick word here about pronunciation. In normal speech, a native speaker saying these sentences, they would probably make have very weak. So you wouldn't hear she seems to have forgotten the meeting. You might hear something like she seems to have. To have. That have becomes of with a schwa. To have. To have. She seems to have forgotten the meeting. And that pronunciation, that weak form, is very obvious as well in the next example with a modal verb. Putting the modal verb in the past. Listen to this example. He must have eaten his dinner already. There's a dirty plate in the sink. Let me say that a bit slower, stressing each word. He must have eaten his dinner already. There's a dirty plate in the sink. So that must have becomes must have. Must have. And because the consonant sound at the end of have is a v sound, it joins together with the vowel sound of eaten. So it sounds like one word, must have eaten. Must have eaten. He must have eaten his dinner already. There's a dirty plate in the sink. And in this example, we're putting must in the past with the perfect have.
Here's one more example. They appear is followed by infinitive. They appear to have left already. Yeah, they're not in the room. I thought they would be. Somebody told me they were in the room 10 minutes ago. So they appear to have left already. To have left is our perfect infinitive. Now, do you remember what we said when we were talking about perfect gerunds that quite often it doesn't really make a difference if you use a perfect gerund or a normal gerund? That's not the case with the infinitives, is it, Craig?
No.
For all of these sentences, there's no way you could use a normal infinitive. I couldn't say they appear to leave already. That doesn't make any sense. It has to be the perfect infinitive. If you're talking about the past, they appear to have left is not at all the same as they appear to leave. Or he must eat his dinner is not at all the same as must have eaten. Definitely here you have to use perfect infinitives to show that it's past possibility or speculation.
Exactly. Oh dear, Craig and Reza appear to have finished all the biscuits again. We We can also use this grammar to speak about unrealized past intentions. So something that we intended to do in the past, but it didn't actually happen. It wasn't realized. It wasn't done. For example, he hoped to have finished the report by now. He hoped to have done it, but he didn't. He hasn't finished it yet. He hoped to have finished the report by now. Notice that weak form again, to have finished. He hoped to have finished that report by now.
Intend is often followed by an infinitive. Here's an example. They intended to have launched the product earlier, but they didn't because the product was delayed. So we have the perfect infinitive, to have launched.
And one more example with these. The government was to have fixed unemployment by now, but it hasn't. That's a typical sentence that I'm sure you've heard before. The government was to have fixed unemployment by now, but unfortunately it hasn't. Not yet. We can also use this grammar to speak about expressing regret or criticism about the past. Any regrets about the past, criticizing what's happened in the past. For example, imagine your friend was going to call you, phone you, but she didn't. You could say, she ought to have called earlier. She ought to have called earlier, but she didn't.
Another verb similar in meaning to ought to is should, but ought is followed by to have called. With should, it's the infinitive without to. You should have informed me about the delay. Not you should inform, that is the normal infinitive, but the perfect infinitive here, you should have informed me about the delay. But now it's too late. Yeah, you should have told me 2 hours ago, but you didn't. We definitely need the perfect infinitive to indicate that.
Another example, imagine you're going on holiday and your travel agent books you into a hotel. When you arrive there, oh my God, there's gunshots, murders in the street. It's really dangerous. You could say to your partner, well, they could have warned us that our hotel is in a dangerous neighborhood. They could have warned us. They could have warned us that our hotel is in a dangerous neighborhood. Why didn't they?
We also sometimes use perfect infinitives in conditional sentences to describe imagined situations. Here's an example. To have arrived earlier, so to have arrived is our perfect infinitive, have plus past participle arrived. To have arrived earlier, you would need to have left at dawn. We have another perfect infinitive, to have left at dawn. But that isn't what happened. You didn't arrive earlier. But this is what you should have done, yeah? To have arrived earlier, you would need to have left at dawn.
Another example, imagine that if you're going to buy a ticket, a train ticket or a concert ticket, and you get a discount if you buy the ticket before 8 p.m., but you didn't. So thinking back, imagining a different result in the past, you might say, to have received a discount, she should have bought the ticket before 8 p.m. yesterday. She didn't buy the ticket before 8. She didn't receive a discount. So the conditional sentence, to have received a discount, she should have bought the ticket. She should have bought the ticket. She should have bought the ticket before 8 p.m. yesterday.
So now that we know about perfect gerunds and perfect infinitives, they can quite often go together. Yes, sometimes both forms appear in the same sentence. And when that happens, I understand that for foreign speakers of English, it's tricky. It's not easy. Can you think of an example, Craig?
How about this? He admitted to having failed to complete the task on time. So he didn't do it. He didn't complete the task on time, and he admitted to it. He admitted to having failed. There's the gerund, the perfect gerund, and to complete is the infinitive. So listen again. He admitted to having failed to complete the task on time. Complicated structure.
Here's another one, which is possibly even more complicated, but if we think about it logically, we'll understand, I hope. Having needed to drink lots of water to quench his thirst, he then had to pee. To pee is to go to the toilet, to urinate, in a polite way in colloquial English. So let's look at the structure. Having needed, that's a perfect gerund. We had examples earlier of perfect gerunds often starting a sentence. And then with the verb need, you must use an infinitive, need to. So we have a combination of perfect gerund followed by perfect infinitive. Having needed to drink lots of water to quench his thirst, he then had to pee.
Yep, that could have been written for me, that example. Peeing all the time, unfortunately. So now it's your turn to practice your English. Can you think of some examples using the grammar that we've spoken about in this podcast? Any examples with gerunds, infinitives, perfect gerunds, perfect infinitives? We would love to hear you practicing this grammar. And the way you do that is by sending us a voice message. If you go to speakpipe.com, that's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast, you'll see a way to send us a voice message of 90 seconds or less. And give us your personal examples and some sentences that you can think of using this grammar. Remember, you can go to the show notes and see the examples we've mentioned. Again, inglespodcast.com/555 is where you will see the show notes. Reza, how can people contact us by email?
If you prefer to write, you could send an email with a comment or question to craig@inglespodcast.com or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And also send me an email if you're interested in joining my conversation classes that will be starting very soon. Now, if you're a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English with free and paid resources, why not visit the Mansion Ingles website at mansioningles.com. And if you're interested in paid products, you can browse the online store at store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to say thank you very much to all of our Patreon supporters. And if you're interested, you could join the program. And as a way of saying thank you to people who sponsor us on the Patreon program, we will give you instant access to the audio transcriptions of the podcast. And as a new recent additional feature, Zoom chats so that you can practice speaking. There's a link in the show notes. Have a look if you're interested. It's patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to mention everybody who is supporting us on Patreon, but we will say thank you, hello, and welcome to our latest Patreon supporters who have joined us this month. And they are Hesselhir Vernot Goosen, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your name, Carlos Lopez Galarza, and Malena Rivas Belafont. Thank you, Malena. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Hesselhir, and every one of our lovely Patreon supporters.
Craig, what are we going to talk about next week?
Well, a suggestion from Carmen, who has been in touch and suggested we speak about travel agencies and useful vocabulary for travel agents and tourists. So we'll be speaking about holidays and how to book them next week. Lots of vocabulary connected to that topic. Until next time, thank you so much for listening this week. Have a wonderful week. And it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.